On today's show, Alex Ovechkin scores number 898 as the Caps down the Wild 5-1.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holmi. I've covered the Capitals for the past 4 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, reactions to Vincent Iorio being placed on waivers, being claimed by the San Jose Sharks, and what are Spencer Carberry's thoughts on it? A bit later, we'll talk about Hendrix Lapierre trade rumors. How times can change. It doesn't seem like it was too long ago that I was talking about the great preseason that Hendrix Lapierre was having. What has changed? But just to get it going here, Alex Ovechkin scoring number 898 for his first goal of the season. And wow, that's the big storyline surrounding this game, right? That Alex Ovechkin has had a lot of milestones, that has gone on through his career. And more recently, last season, the whole catching and passing Wayne Gretzky, that we have another milestone coming up here in just a couple games, that the Great Eight in what very well could be his last season in the NHL continues to keep knocking it out of the park. And if you didn't see the game, it was quite a goal. Dylan Strom winning the faceoff, shoots it back to Alex Ovechkin. Alex Ovechkin fires a no-doubter past Gustafsson goal in the third period. One of those fist-pumping moments in the game, that is for sure. And as far as the Capitals are concerned, this team is playing very well right now. I'll talk a bit later about things that they need to work on, but the offense coming out to play tonight. Listen, it wasn't long ago I was telling you guys about how they need to get more shots. The Capitals out shooting the Minnesota Wild 45-14. And earlier in the game, there was quite even a larger disparity, but the Capitals showing up to play a big game for the Capitals, and a lot to dive into. So, take a seat there, grab something to drink. I have a lot to unpack in today's episode, and just talking about the big thing. Like I said, out shooting the Wild by a large margin. That is definitely something that is going to serve them well, especially since the Capitals have some great firepower out there that can find the back of the net. But as far as Ovechkin scoring, I know it was in the third period, but you could just tell kind of a collective release amongst all the players out there, that when Ovi scores, that it kind of just radiates the positivity that the captain scored. And like I said, maybe the dam will be broke open here and he'll go on to score a bunch more goals. But wow, what a great game and chemistry. Let's talk about chemistry between Alex Ovechkin and Dylan Strom. Strom, 2 goals, 2 assists, 5 shots on goal. That there's a reason that those two work so well together on that first line. And you remember Alex Ovechkin a couple seasons ago saying, oh, it's a turnstile. If I could find consistency with the center on the first line, you got it. Dylan Strom is the guy. His hockey IQ is off the charts, sees the ice so well, and was definitely a key contributor tonight for the Capitals. And also Protus and Wilson. Protus scoring his 4th goal of the season. I knew, that he was going to do well. I guess I didn't necessarily know he was going to continue to do so well. And I understand we're really, really early in the season, right? But, listening to different people, I was listening to Dan Rosen on on the Capitals morning show there, John Walton's show. And John Walton was asking him about why many people around the NHL don't think the Capitals are going to be as good this year as they were last year. And Dan Rosen talked about that, a lot of players on the Capitals put up career numbers. What are the odds that those players are going to be able to put up those same record numbers yet again, the best numbers of their career? Well, I'm here to tell you, I don't know about all the players, but Alexei Protus, hold on to your seat here. This is going to be one heck of a season by Alexei Protus. And Tom Wilson, doing what he does best out there. A physical presence and, getting involved in second chances. He was around the net, exactly the kind of presence you want in those tight games. And definitely the leader, this season. And I'm not saying that Alex Ovechkin is not the leader, but you can kind of almost sense that Tom Wilson has taken on that role as the leader. And when he's out there, when he's engaged, it is noticeable. The thing, though, that I will say I really liked about this game, there's a lot of things that I liked about the game, but generally speaking, it's the top six that gets the production, right? But I'm talking about in this game that it wasn't just the top six. The bottom six didn't just survive. They created. Sonny Milano had moments. Hendrix Lapierre was active. Ryan Leonard was involved. A little bit later in the show, in the third segment, I'll talk about questions about Hendrix Lapierre's future. But I thought that line looked pretty good. And Sonny Milano in the mix, that's good. And the fourth line, forechecking and the energy that that they brought helped tilt the possession and gave the top lines cleaner looks. As always, right? That when you have Nick Dowd, when you have Duhaime, and now sort of in the mix, I think that that fourth line is coming together very nicely. And it was, like I said, this was a nice team victory. The power play, let's talk about things that the Capitals need to work on is the power play. They were 1 for 5. And, you take a look at the 5-1 final, that could have been a win by a larger margin. But they're continuing to struggle, and especially an extended 4 minutes on the penalty there as well, that they did not make good on that either. So, those are the things, you got to give kind of a tip of the hat to the Minnesota Wild as well for their PK, not that I like it, but, just kind of an acknowledgement that they did a good job. And former Capital Marcus Johansson, finding the back of the net for the Minnesota Wild, who continues to come back and haunt the Capitals, it seems like, on a pretty regular basis. I think in a lot of ways, he kind of relishes that. But, we know who Marcus Johansson was, a key contributor for the Capitals for so many years. And when I talked about earlier, that it's not just the top six, it's the bottom six, but also in this game as well is the defense getting involved in the production. Carlson getting the goal. And then all of a sudden you take a look at Martin Feravari, 6 shots on goal. John Carlson, 6 shots on goal. That, like I said, it is just, quite impressive what this team has been able to put together. And I'm continuing to have more optimism the more that I watch these games. Now, to be clear here, there are still plenty of things I think that the Capitals need to work on, more specifically the power play. That's got to get better, right, guys? But it is a work in progress. But there's not a lot of negativity to take, mostly positive, that this was a real team victory. And not to be lost in all of this as well as Logan Thompson doing what he had to do, saving 13 of 14, that the luxury that the Capitals have between the pipes, that on a Friday night, you got to be feeling really, really good about this team and excited to think about what the game this weekend has ahead. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Vincent Iorio. We'll talk about the reactions of head coach Spencer Carberry and others. What were their thoughts on the future of Vincent Iorio? I'll discuss straight ahead. Hockey season is officially here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. But let's be real, getting tickets can be a total headache. Between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout, it's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your favorite team. That's where Game Time comes in. The app gives you and the fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NHL tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. I love that when you see is what you pay, no hidden fees at checkouts. Plus, I could see exactly what my view looked like before I bought the tickets with their in-app seat feature. And I'm going to see the the Capitals play the Wild in St. Paul in December, and you better believe that I am going to be using Game Time. I think you should be using them as well. Why? Take the guesswork out of buying NHL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So the talk around Vincent Iorio continues. And what a hornet's nest that we jabbed talking about Vincent Iorio. I have heard the spectrum on social media. I've heard some of the fans saying that good for Vincent Iorio. What are you complaining about? And he wasn't that great of a guy anyway. They have better guys down in Hershey. There's that part of it. And then the other part, which kind of I'm in, is I'm happy for the man. I'm just kind of upset the Capitals got zero for him. Again, there were no surprises by the Capitals organization that, if there was, people saying that they're happy about it, of course, but wouldn't you have been happier had the Capitals got something in return? So let's dive into that in the second segment here, talking about all of the activity, and the buzz that surrounds the Vincent Iorio debacle, I guess you could say. And Spencer Carberry weighs in on it as well. And it's time to settle into that roster noise. Vincent Iorio, like I said, was placed on waivers, and surprise to no one, he got claimed by an NHL team, more specifically the San Jose Sharks. And let that sit for a moment. For a lot of fans, this was surprising. For the organization, it was complicated. And Spencer Carberry used words like, quote, really difficult, unquote, and, quote, bittersweet, unquote, when asked about it. And, it's part of the risk, right? That, you take a look at it. This would have been truly awful if Clay Stevenson had got scooped up, and also if Vincent Iorio was taken off the waiver wire as well. But that's the risk, right? And well, the Capitals found out about the risk, and you can hear the split. The coach who respects the player but is also dealing with roster realities. Again, to circle back to my main point, this came as a surprise to nobody. That we know that there's a lot of great talent in Hershey. With that said, why didn't you trade him? Again, that is the biggest takeaway, the only takeaway as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not talking about, some people are like, well, you're not going to be able to trade him right around the time he's put on waivers. Oh, no. I was talking way before this, before camp, before anything. It's like seeing a car wreck on the horizon and then being surprised when you pull up to it like, wow, there's a car accident here. Who would have thunk? We saw this mess coming from a mile away. Why did the Capitals let it go this far? They knew he wasn't going to crack the roster, right? We knew that he wasn't going to supplant Dylan McIlrath. We know all the things that are said. So it should come as no surprise. We walked right into it. The Capitals walked right into it. So first, the timeline. Iorio was in camp. He flashed enough to make people excited about his upside. Then the Caps made a roster decision, and he was exposed to waivers. And San Jose claimed him. That's the simple sequence of events. And my belief as well is that, Dylan McElrath, a guy that's in his early 30s and is making, a decent amount of money, would have had a better chance, right? I think than, I don't think there was a lot of other teams that were going to take a flyer on Dylan McElrath, that you knew that you were kind of dangling a piece of meat to a lion's cage, if you will, when you put Vincent Iorio on the waiver wire. And what do you know? That is what happened. But a painful result if you're invested in internal defensive depth. And that's the position that the Capitals are in. So let's talk about the player and what Iorio brings to the team. He has a good upside. He is a defender that did the things that he needed to do. He put on the weight. He is good with the puck, not the flashiest of players, but dependable, reliable, and ultimately why the Capitals were so invested into him for a long time. I think he would have been a good option as an extra defender. And I know the things that, were said about him, that, they didn't want to stunt his growth by having him up in the fancy seats, right up in the press box. But this is a guy that was drafted in 2021. It's 2025 right now. It's not like he is some young man in the league. So I think that doesn't hold as much water with me as it does for other people. But, like I said, the other thing is the roster math. The NHL is unforgiving about roster spots and cap decisions. Sometimes teams are forced to expose players because another piece needs to be on the roster. That can be a veterans, emergency depth, or salary smoothing. Layer 3, the organizational optics. Exposing a high upside prospect and losing him is a narrative you cannot easily shake. This is one of the things I talked about on the Capitals Minute Cast, my other podcast, that this is one of the biggest blunders, I guess I'm going to say, under the Chris Patrick administration. And, I don't want to say, that this is as, one of the worst, but this is definitely, this is a blunder that I think is going to be hard to erase. This isn't Philip Forsberg category yet, but, you take a look at that combined to the lack of moves made in the offseason. You hit the equals button on it and you look at it and you go, Chris Patrick is not off to his best start, in my opinion, in the GM role. But you take a look at it, there is a conversation about how teams protect prospects and whether the Caps misstepped. And talking about the consequences, short term, that the depth chart is thinner. Longer term, if Iorio plays well for San Jose, that can be a point of frustration for fans and a footnote for a management all season long. That, he was a player that was always supposed to be his turn, never was his turn. And I understand that there was some injury involved there as well. But say he does, he plays for San Jose and he absolutely knocks it out of the park. There's going to be a lot of questions that need to be answered because, like I said in yesterday's show, injuries are a thing that you have to factor in. There's going to be injuries. I know the Capitals got relatively lucky last season. I know that Chychrun, I know that Roy missed some time on the blue line, but we don't know what kind of season we're going to have this season. So when you take a look at it, it is a bitter pill for the Capitals to swallow. So you take a look at it. Here are a couple of specific angles to watch over the next few weeks. One, how the Caps defend, without Iorio on the depth chart. I don't think that factors in a significant amount because he was going to be an extra. I guess that's more of a Bears question. And two, how Iorio looks in San Jose. That's the biggest one for me to circle, to underline, is how well does he adapt to playing hockey in San Jose? Because, that's just what's going to make it sting that much worse, that we knew, unless there was a player injured on the Capitals, that he was going to be that extra defender. If there was an alternate reality, right, that say he did clear waivers and was sent to Hershey, that would have been a big loss for Hershey as well. Not having him in the mix. So it is a bit frustrating for me, even reflecting back on the story from yesterday, and to hear Spencer Carberry talk about it and go, it's bittersweet. And, just kind of all these, the things that you say that don't hold a significant value with me. It's a problem that they put him on waivers, that they had him be exposed. And now the Capitals are going to have to sit with that they had a homegrown talent that they put a lot of stock in. Because like I said, you take a look at it, John Carlson is in a contract year. Trevor Van Riemsdyk is in a contract year. And it would be nice to have more of that kind of depth around the organization, because this team is going to be facing changes sooner than later. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about trade rumblings surrounding Hendrix Lapierre. Again, it wasn't that long ago. We were talking about how great of a camp he had, and now rumblings out there from Saravalli and Friedman. What's the latest? I'll break it all down next. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right, pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how using FanDuel gives me so many ways to play. I've built parlays, tried player props, and even followed the live lines during the game. Now listen, on any given Sunday or Monday or Thursday, your favorite team's playing, whether it's the Commanders or the Ravens. But say you want vested interest in all of the games, including the Commanders or Ravens. Open up the FanDuel app, put $5 on the game. All of a sudden, it got that much more exciting. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment of today's show, rumbles out there from some NHL insiders. I'm talking Elliotte Friedman. I'm talking Frank Saravalli, that there's talk out there that Hendrix Lapierre might be on the trade block. And I've talked about this, didn't I? I said, even before the season formally kicked off, that I want to see how well he plays after, say, 10, 12 games or so. That he played good in the preseason, but how well is he going to play in the NHL and more than just a couple games? I'm talking a stretch of games. And what we've seen so far has been, it hasn't been great and it hasn't been bad. So let's talk about the latest surrounding Hendrix Lapierre in the final segment of today's show. And Hendrix Lapierre has been making the rounds in the rumor circles. Let's be clear what's true and what's noise. Fact one, he was a first-round pick. Fact two, he showed up in preseason and looked good. And fact three, his regular season usage has been inconsistent. And those facts create the exact environment where whispers turn into stories. That, those insiders know that he signed, or I should say the Capitals signed him to a bridge deal as a prove-it deal, as a last-ditch effort to say, hey, this is your opportunity to shine. You better shine or you're off to your next NHL adventure. And let's talk about the contract and the roster logistics quickly here. Lapierre is not waiver exempt anymore, and he's heading towards an RFA status after this season. And the combination affects how teams value him and how the Caps might approach negotiations or trades. You want a really early take. I think we're still a little bit early to judge. Like I said, I would like to stand pat with, let's say, 10 all the way up to 15 games and kind of average that out. Is he progressing? Is he taking steps back? Is he kind of staying where he was? And use that to evaluate. Unless someone really, puts out something rather tantalizing, I think that we're a bit early. And, oftentimes on this show, I'm the first one to say, trade, get whatever you possibly can. I think we're still a little bit early in all of this to make a full assessment on where he's at right now. So let's unpack the realistic options and the reasoning behind each, not as instructions, just as likely ways they play out. Option A, keep him and commit to a consistent role. If the Caps give Lapierre stable minutes and a role that plays to his speed, they may unlock his ceiling. That's development over quick returns. And option B, trade him for a roster need. And that's something to consider, right? That we talked about that, Chris Patrick didn't do a whole lot in the offseason. That if they want to make a trade, his name could be involved in there. But the hard part about it is if another team is interested in him, they're going to question what kind of player he is this year. I know that he did very well for Hershey last year, but that's the American League. And I know his pedigree, his history, that I don't think that the return that you're going to get for Hendrix Lapierre is going to be as great as you think. He can fetch a return, but I think it's important to temper expectations there. Because the thing of it is that the Capitals need, let's say they need a middle six center, a two-way forward with term, or, a specific piece for depth. They could move Lapierre while his value is relatively high. So that's the risk therein, is if they wait too long, right, that say he tanks another season, then he is going to the back end of the used car lot. So I think that the Capitals should take some time to evaluate. I don't think they should take too much time to evaluate and view him as an asset that you can move. Option C here is more of a hybrid approach. Keep him, but create a short-term opportunity elsewhere via situational shifts. That's messier, but it's on the table. So let's talk about evaluation. Lapierre's upside is real, right? I don't think anyone thinks he's a horrible player. Teams prize speed, youth, and draft pedigree, and he has those things. If he's put in a clear role and thrives, his value can jump fast. So I guess what I'm saying about this as well is that even if he thrives, and I guess it depends on the level in which he does thrive, I would still consider moving him, right? That, what we have seen, even if he's good this season, has been a bit inconsistent. And if he stagnates, then the market cools. That you want him to play better. It's advantageous if he plays better, if he's staying here or if he's leaving, because if his play continues to go down, 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 his value is going to go down, down, down as well. Not an apples for apples comparison, but look at Evgeny Kuznetsov. His agent said he will be playing in the NHL this year. Guess who ain't playing in the NHL this year? That, his value went down. And again, it's more of an apples and oranges comparison, but I think you understand what I'm getting at here is that if you don't play well, your value shrinks. So what would a realistic market look like for him? Teams that need young, cheap speed in bottom six roles, or teams that like to flip youth for term could be interested. He's not a top flight trade chip yet. What teams would be interested in a player like Hendrix Lapierre? San Jose, another team that comes to mind. I would say the Senators come to mind. I would say the Buffalo Sabres come to mind. That there are teams that are kind of looking to retool to get, have better young talent. Those are just three teams off the top of my head. I'm sure there's other teams in the mix that I have no doubt that he can land somewhere in the NHL and, possibly might get assigned to their AHL affiliate. So I think that there is some value there. I know there is. But like I said, timing is the big thing. That is for sure. So let me run through indicators you should watch. Indicator one, consistent low minutes for Lapierre. That's what's fueling these rumors in the first place. If he's trending down, the trade chance grows. That's what that's what Frank Saravalli saw, is they knew this guy was a question mark. And then they saw limited usage by him. I think that just really grew the rumblings. Indicator two, public or beat reports hinting at teams calling the Caps. If that shows up, it's a stronger sign. And finally, indicator three, how management talks about him publicly. I think that will all be determined, if he's in the game. The thing about Spencer Carberry is he is very candid. He's not afraid of giving out tough love if a player's not playing that well. And he's also, the guy that's going to be the biggest cheerleader for a player as well. So I think that, you'll be able to sense the vibe, that I think, and we've seen that from Spencer Carberry before. We saw him talk about Sonny Milano last season and Hendrix Lapierre last season, where he definitely, gave some tough takes on some young players. So if you continue to see Hendrix Lapierre getting limited usage, like I said, and if you hear in interviews from someone like Spencer Carberry not saying too glowing of things about him, then you better believe that Chris Patrick is somewhere in the background on his phone, fielding an email from other teams, trying to say, hey, we need to move this piece. It's just not working. And to be clear here, this was a life preserver that was thrown to Hendrix Lapierre. I thought his days as a Capital were done. And then they gave him that bridge deal. So a lot of this is going to be determined by Hendrix Lapierre, the man, the player. Can he elevate his game? That's good for him if he's going to be a Capital in the future or if he's not going to be a Capital in the future. But the future for him ultimately lies in his hands. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. And now for your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL or on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holmi, and I'll talk to you again next time.